Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It is great to have everyone here today. I'm trying something a little bit new, and I don't know if I'm going to make this a regular thing or if this is just going to be a one-time thing. So it's kind of going to depend on how many people end up watching it. But I know that this is something that I certainly like to have available to me, which is a little bit of remedial science, because so much of what I know about current science I have learned from watching other YouTubers, and I recently discovered Walker, just a walking fish, on Jackson Wheat's channel, and so I invited him to come over and teach us a little bit of science today. So, hello, Walker.
Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing?
And it is so good to see everyone. So many of my friends in the chat. Atheist Mo is here, and Purple Rhymes with Orange is here, and Answers in Atheism is here. Welcome, Answers in Atheism. He says, "I wish I was old enough to watch this one." You don't have to be an old fart to watch it. You just have to be, in need of a little bit of remedial science, like I was. And here's how it came about that I came to be. Oh, and Brainbug is here. Hello, Brainbug. Brainbug is definitely someone who does not need remedial science, but
Yeah.
he can keep us on our toes and make sure that we get everything right. But here's how this show kind of came about, and that is when I was young, I took the usual science classes, but once I graduated from college, I went into a field that was a non science field. And so I really have not given any thought to science since I've graduated. And even in college, because I got a liberal arts degree, not a Bachelor of Science degree, I really didn't need much science. The only science classes that I took in college was I took Biology 101 and I took Chemistry 101 for non-chemistry majors, which was a fun class. We made nylon, we made wine, we made brandy. We just made fun things. And what did I learn in that class? Really, not much of anything except how to make brandy. And you do have to remember that when I was in college, drinking was legal for 18-year-olds. So anyway, when I deconverted and I started learning so much science that was in conflict with what I had believed in my religious beliefs for so long, I started realizing that, my gosh, there's a lot out there that I just don't know. And so I started thinking back of what I knew of evolution. And my first memory of learning of evolution was in a sixth grade history class. But the only thing I remember about it is I remember my teacher was so excited to be teaching it. I meant to bring this illustration and I forgot. But if you remember the linear illustration of the evolution of man, she had that on the wall as a chart.
The March of Progress.
Right, the March of
Mhm.
Progress, because that was the current thought of the day. And even in sixth grade, which would have been about 1974, my teacher was a fairly elderly woman at that time. At least she seemed to me. I don't, maybe if I went back and met her, she wouldn't be. But anyway, she was just so excited about it. She kept saying, "This is so interesting. This is so interesting." And I don't remember learning anything about evolution other than it just fascinated her. I'm sure I did learn a lot about it, but I just don't remember it anymore. That was so long ago. And then biology in high school. I'm sure we learned something about evolution in biology in high school, but again, I don't really remember it. I remember some things that we did in high school biology. I remember dissecting a crawfish, and I remember our teacher thinking that dissecting worms was dumb because you can't really see what you're after, and so she had us dissect crawfish instead. And we dissected something else, and I can't even remember what else. So I'm sure we did learn about evolution, but it's just not something I remembered because it's not something I ever think about. It's not something I ever used once I got out of school. But by the time I got into college, I was a Christian and I was being told not to trust anything about evolution. I was told that the dating methods that they use for determining how old something is are completely fallacious, that carbon-14 dating is completely unreliable, and we really can't learn anything from it. So if I learned about evolution in college biology, which I probably did, it went in one ear and out the other because I'd been taught to ignore it. And then, of course, ever since then, I've been ignoring it. So with that said, realizing that my understanding of evolution is
Oh,
no
crap.
later than 1979, because that's the last time I was in a biology class, let's learn about human evolution and not the progress of man chart. So Walker, go ahead.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Also, apologies. The reason I said "oh crap" had nothing to do with what you were saying. It's because my internet froze up. So
Oh,
apologies if my internet decides to crap out on me.
no worries. Mine has done that. I had a stream once where I got kicked out of my own stream, and it was 20 minutes before I could get my own internet back up and rejoin my stream. Fortunately, it was a stream where I had 4 guests, and the other guests just kept the show going until I got back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think it's actually kind of funny. I didn't really learn about evolution and specifically not human evolution in my school at all. The teacher said it was too controversial, which is funny. You know, I don't know. I mean, at that point, I was definitely already pretty into evolution. I'll share my like short PowerPoint.
Oh, good. You've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I learned. That's what I learned.
Yeah. That's typically the historical view that a lot of people took of just like a very gradualistic change over time and also very, very linear from chimps or Dryopithecenes in this case to modern humans. That's not quite accurate. This is how a lot of people portrayed whale evolution and horse evolution too, right? So it's not exclusively humans, but a lot of populations nowadays are recognized to be like way more messy. I think this is the figure you were talking about, right?
It is, yes. I saw Walker put this figure in a video of his that I watched, and I had heard Vice Rhino a number of times say that evolution isn't linear, and he kind of explained it but I never could really picture it until I saw this picture, and this really helped me get a better idea of how it worked.
Yeah, so the area that I'm currently doing like research in and stuff like that, and just the area that I think is the time era that I think is like just the coolest, is specifically like the late Pleistocene to the late Ice Age, which is when you have a lot of these different people groups like walking around and doing things that archaic humans do, I guess. And it really, really is a very messy story. It's there's that whole idea that humans just came out of Africa and quickly replaced all the different populations. But, that's not true at all. Our ancestors were obviously interbreeding and intermingling and living with and fighting with all of the different Neanderthals, Denisovans, even more archaic populations like Homo Erectus and stuff like that. I like calling this time period the Middle Earth almost, just because of how many different people groups were just living and doing their own thing in very disparate regions of the world. And there's sort of like a continuum between, the more derived Homo sapiens and, Sub-Saharan Africa mostly, all the way to comparatively primitive, quote unquote, populations like Homo floresiensis. I think, when you say words like primitive and derived, well, not derived, but like primitive, you're sort of implying intentionality to evolution and saying that like, there's a direction, which there's not. Yeah, very, very different groups of people. One thing I would be cautious about with using a graph like this, though, is it also, funnily enough, tells a story that's a little too linear in some ways. Because it has that little bubble of like Homo heidelbergensis, and that bubble evolves into Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and Denisovans. but there are like Homo erectus, for example. There are most Homo erectus populations were in no way ancestral to any of the other clades that are like on this page.
Mm.
Like I have this figure right here from a recent paper over the summer. It's the Harbin cranium skull. If y'all saw that, it has some pretty big methodological problems. So like, don't take the actual relationships with this tree with a grain of salt. But like, I think it's more representative of how there's just a bunch of different populations all living around the same time. And the Homo erectus group that it has all the way on the left. A lot of you have some Homo erectines that are more closely related to us than others, and you have obviously some Homo erectus like population had to have been ancestral, but other Homo erectus like populations were just doing their own thing in Asia and didn't really contribute to our DNA. And then there's others that probably existed in Africa alongside our ancestors and did contribute to our DNA in like minor amounts through hybridization and stuff like that.
So are the groupings that you've got on that illustration, are those primarily because of location, that that they evolved in the different groupings because they
yes,
evolved in different locations?
a lot of. So that's. I'm sorry if I robot because you just cut out a bit for me, but for the most part, right? The traditional story is that Homo erectus was the earliest hominin to leave Africa. Probably not true. And then once it got to other parts of the world, it speciated into different populations, right? So you have one population in Southeast Asia that sort of stays, quote, Homo erectus, but they're like derived Homo erectus, I guess. And then you have like a Homo heidelbergensis population forming over here, if you can see my cursor, in mostly the Middle East and like Southern Europe, and then that population from the Middle East goes back into Africa, eventually giving rise to our lineage, and then
And about what time,
Asia, Europe.
about what time frame are we looking at I'm not even sure what to call them, that the early humans started to leave Africa?
So the earliest humans, and when I say human, I'm using it kind of loosely. I just mean anything in the genus Homo. Obviously, genuses, genera, they're arbitrary. But the genus Homo arose about 2.2 million years ago in Africa from the genus Australopithecus. So that would be like Lucy and the Tong child and stuff like that. Homo habilis was mostly restricted to Africa. People think that it may have actually migrated out because it might be ancestral to Floresiensis, but that's debated. Homo erectus, I think the earliest Homo erectus fossils are from northern Africa, and actually in the Caucasus regions, you have the Dmanisi cave, and that's going to be about 1.8 million years ago.
Okay.
Right, and so Homo erectus is going to start spreading out around 1.5 million years ago and colonizing most of the old world.
And I'm going to show some real lack of knowledge here.
Mm-hmm.
Did the Pangea still exist at that time? What kind of land bridges were there, for that kind of migration to occur?
So the continents they were at this point pretty close to where they are now.
Okay.
But of course, this is right in the middle of the ice age, so the sea levels are a lot lower.
And
they're
a lot lower,
also,
did you say?
The sea levels are lower because a lot of the water was sucked up into the ice caps.
Okay.
So that would have made migration from Africa into Southeast Asia a little easier. It would have made it, most of the islands in Indonesia would have been connected at this time. Even though they're in the same place, the sea levels would have been about 300 meters lower. And I'm trying to think. Oh, there's also so like the Saharan region. Actually, interestingly enough, it rotates in and out of being a desert and being like a savanna type ecosystem. So that also would have made traveling across the Sahara a lot easier. So, obviously, not to take away anything from Homo erectus, and like their ability to just, spread out and multiply, I guess, to borrow some biblical language. But it would have been a lot easier to migrate around, especially in like waves, stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's I don't know. I just think it's a really cool time period. I think there's a lot of interesting work because we're just now getting to sequence ancient DNA and understand how all these population movements were going, 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago.
So scientists are able to extract DNA from a lot of the human remains that they find?
So it's really interesting, and that's one of the problems that I'm investigating in research. But we're only able to extract DNA from things that are, roughly. We can get good DNA samples from things that are less than 100,000 years old, and you can get proteins and super degraded DNA from things that are like 500,000 years old. Yeah, Panama connected to South America. That was mostly due to volcanic activity. The continents were still in relatively the same location. So, out of all of these populations on this little chart, we have good DNA from Denisovans, we have good DNA from Neanderthals, and obviously we have more than enough DNA from our species, Homo sapiens. Mm-hmm. We have a little bit of DNA from Heidelbergensis, and we have like some proteins from Homo Antecessor. That's really about it. We're starting to get more and more. I mean, I think it's been following what's that law? Moore's law. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Where, it's the idea that like, the power of computing or like the efficiency of a field will like double every year. And I think the amount of ancient DNA we've been able to sequence has been following Moore's law. So, I mean, right now we're living in sort of like the most ancient DNA that we've ever had. There's papers coming out almost monthly at this point saying like, oh, we sequenced a protein from this species, or we have, mitochondrial genome sequences from this species or something like that. But, it's a relatively new practice as well. The first real ancient DNA was sequenced about 20-ish years ago, and we didn't start getting good ancient DNA until like 15.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives you a better picture of migration?
Yeah. So, obviously having fossils will tell you a lot about how the people lived and what their environment looked like and stuff like that. But it can't really tell you too terribly much about specific relationships between that population and other population. It can't tell you about how, like, you can sort of infer that this population moved around based on like presence or absence of fossils, but you can't really know like how big that population was until you have DNA, because you can see like, okay, were these people inbred, right? Were they interbreeding with this other population that's on the other side of the continent, right? So you can really learn a lot about different groups from their DNA, for sure.
So it would give you an idea if there's another group out there that we don't know about.
Yeah, that's something really interesting. I have some papers I could share. I would need to find them though. But there's predicted to be a archaic ghost lineage from Sub-Saharan Africa that we just have no idea about. We've never seen anything, like don't have any fossils from them. We don't have any proteins from them. We don't have anything, but we've been able to pick up some pretty archaic admixture in certain populations, particularly around like Ghana and like the Ivory Coast and stuff like that. So there's that. And then, I mean, even Denisovans, they're up here on this graph. We don't actually have any Denisovan fossils. All of the DNA. So every Denisovan fossil we've had has either been like a broken finger bone or a molar or something like that. And we've been able to get their DNA, and we have their full genome sequences with like really high resolution. But we don't actually know what they looked like, which is kind of funny.
Wow. If my 6th grade teacher could hear that, I think she would just be over the moon. I think she would just find that so fascinating that she would just be over the moon.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. I always hear that statistic that people say like, oh, we've only ever found 1% of all fossils or something like that. I honestly think that's a massive underestimate. I think, or overestimate, sorry. I think we have like very, very, except for like the super widespread species, I don't think we know very much at all about, what the Earth looked like in the past. We can get ecological data, obviously, so we know like what environments there were. But the actual species that lived there probably don't even have like 0.0001%. The Denisovans, I think, make this example perfectly because we do have their full genome. We know that our species was interbreeding with them right here. We know we can tell a lot about the specific interactions that our history had with this population, but we don't even know what they looked like. That's just crazy to me. We know that Denisovans. So we've only found true Denisovan fossils from this one cave in Siberia, the Denisova cave, and then there's maybe a jaw of Denisovan from a cave in like Tibet.
Okay.
And we don't know really anything about that, but we know that certain, Austronesian populations, like the Papuans from Papua New Guinea, Denisovans make up at least 6 to 10% of their ancestry. So, there was huge admixture waves and hybridization waves that we don't really have any evidence for besides in our DNA. We know that there are certain populations in Tibet that have they've inherited genes from Denisovans that help them live in, low oxygen environments. They wouldn't be able to live in Tibet if they didn't get those genes from the Denisovans. But we have one questionable fossil from like south of Siberia, and that's all we have. So we know that they were very widespread, and that's about it. We don't actually know what their range looked like, other than they were probably very widespread.
Okay. So they probably were not, when you first started mentioning cave in Siberia, I know that Siberian tigers are a very small population of tigers, and that there were never very many of them because they were limited to a very small geographic area. And so at first, when you mentioned them being found in Siberia, I thought, in a cave in Siberia, I thought, oh, maybe these were someone that was limited to a very, very small area, but that's not the case.
No, not at all. They probably had a range that extended from northern Siberia, potentially all the way. We know that they were interbreeding with Neanderthals. So there was at least a fuzzy boundary around where Asia and Europe hit, right? That would have been where they were interbreeding with Neanderthals. So they would have extended all the way from, Siberia and northwestern Asia, probably all the way down into like the Malay Peninsula. So super, super widespread.
Okay. What about the Americas? Would there have been some of these early people in the Americas?
So as far as we know, our species were the first people to inhabit North America or South America.
Okay.
The creationists might say something about Nebraska Man, but yeah,
But
no,
he's
as far as we know.
Wasn't he?
So it was actually a peccary, which is closely related to a pig. They found a peccary tooth, and this was in the early 1900s when everybody was trying to find human fossils so that every country could claim that they were the ancestors of all humans. And so people saw this tooth. It was misidentified for human, and then they just took it and ran with it. And then it later turned out to, obviously be from a pig-like animal and not actually from a human.
Okay. So the earliest people that were pre-Homo sapien, they were pretty much in Africa, Asia, and Europe, correct?
Yeah. Genus Homo lived in all those continents. I would say It depends how you define pre-Homo sapien.
Okay.
Because, like I said, it is so messy. Archaic modern humans, so humans that are more closely related to us, but still not ancestral to us. They would have lived in Africa, and then our population mostly moved out of Africa as like a third or fourth wave out of Africa.
Okay.
But
how about Australia?
once again, so we have certain archaic populations from like Indonesia. So you have Java man, which is the type specimen of Homo erectus. You have Homo floresiensis, which would have lived on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Homo luzonensis, which lived in the Philippines. As far as I know, no other human populations besides our species made it to New Guinea or Australia. Of course, that's not out of the question, considering we do know, like I said, early human species were living pretty close to it, and definitely were able to like island hop at least.
Okay. I was watching something the other day, and I don't remember what it was, where they were talking about early humans, and it might even possibly have been your channel. I'm not sure. I watch so much stuff; it's hard to keep it all straight. But they were talking about how the Aborigines of Australia have skulls that are slightly different than most Homo sapiens, but they are most definitely Homo sapiens. They are not, any of the other early man. Can you comment on that?
So I'm not super well informed on like comparative morphology.
Okay.
But I would say, I guess by definition, all modern humans are within the morphological range of modern humans. I don't know. I mean, every population is going to have some phenotypic differences here or there. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I would say they're still very much within the range of taxonomically modern humans. They're not, and they're not even like a basal haplogroup. So like genetically, Aboriginal Australian people are more closely related to East Asian populations, European populations than they would be to like the Khoisan people are the most basal human haplogroup, and they live in around the Horn of Africa, so like South Africa, Namibia, that area.
Okay. Harmonica Man asks, pre-Homo sapiens were Cro-Magnon, right?
So that's an interesting question. It was originally thought that, right, back in the 60s or so. People thought that, once again, all the different countries were trying to say humans came from here. We're the ancestors of all humans. And so that was sort of a push by Europe and France to say that modern humans came out of Europe. We've done more like actual morphological and like methodical studies, and we've also been able to sequence a little bit of DNA from them. And we know that they're actually more closely related to modern human or like modern European. So they would have branched off after the most recent common ancestor of modern humans, if that makes sense. So they were closer to being ancestral to European populations, but they're not necessarily ancestral to all humans.
Okay. And Purple Rhymes with Orange says the longer a population has been isolated, the more genetic differences will emerge.
Yep. Whenever two populations separate, the a number of genetic mutations that accumulate is roughly a function of time. I mean, there's other factors involved, like population size, how many of these mutations are under selection. But I mean, yes, yeah, for sure. Populations that are separated will continue to evolve in different directions.
Okay. Thinking back to your chart, obviously there were some pre-sapien people, for a better word, that obviously went extinct without being directly in the lineage of Homo sapiens. Do you know if there was kind of a regional thing that, all people groups went extinct in particular regions, or, do you get where I'm going with that?
Do you mean like? Well, I don't know. What are you
Well, what I'm
meaning by
thinking in
that?
terms of is, maybe there was some kind of environmental thing that went on in Africa, that all the people groups that were in Africa all went extinct because the environment may have become too hostile for
Hmm.
that kind of a being in that area, but the people groups that were, say, in Asia may not have um, endured that event.
Yeah, so there definitely were. I mean, evolution is hugely dependent on climatic variables.
Okay.
Um, we can detect population bottlenecks in our own genomes from volcanoes that exploded 40,000 years ago, stuff like that.
Oh my word!
Um,
Really?
yeah, yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That is
Um,
interesting.
and I don't know about like the Southeast Asian populations, um, but I do know that the decline of Neanderthals and Denisovans is very strongly correlated with the end of the Ice Age and everything warming up.
Hmm.
Um, but also, I mean, there's a bunch of other factors. So, was it because the climate was changing, or was it because the climate changing made their food go extinct?
Hmm.
And did they even go extinct in the first place, or did they just all interbreed into our population? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's very hard to. It's easy to correlate a lot of climactic things that happened with genetic histories and populational histories, but it's very hard to give it causation, if that makes sense.
It does, but you know what I'm thinking now is, for me, a lot of things go back to young Earth creationists,
Mm-hmm.
because for so long the young Earth creationists had me fooled.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was able to realize that the young Earth creationists were wrong, I was still a believer in Christianity, which I realize, a lot of people are. There are a lot of scientists that don't believe in young Earth, but are still believers in religion. But the thing that I'm thinking is that, you mentioned being able to detect bottlenecks in the population. If there really was a global flood that reduced the population of the earth to 8 people approximately 4,000 years ago, that should be obvious from the genome.
Oh, absolutely. That should be extremely like overbearingly obvious. Um, it, it's not. So I was also a young Earth creationist.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Um, there's some interesting stuff. Are you familiar with Joshua Swamidass?
No.
So he's a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. Um, and he's like super big into theistic evolution. He did some actual calculations on the time to most recent 10 alleles, right? Because if you think about it, humans have two alleles. We're all diploid. Noah would have had two alleles. His wife would have had two alleles, and all three of their sons would have been, so they would have been from those four alleles. And then you could say that each of Noah's four wives, or not Noah's four wives, Noah's sons' three wives all had their own unique two alleles, right? So during the ark, aboard the ark, there should have only been 10 human alleles for any given like site on your genome. Um, and so Josh Swamidass said, okay, so let's calculate the time to most recent 10 alleles. How long ago in the past were there only, obviously at the time there were more than 10 alleles going around, but how long in the past could we go to say that there were 10 alleles that are ancestral to all of the modern alleles right now? He calculated, and it was like 500,000 years ago or something.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So
wow.
way, way outside the range of
Yeah,
plausibility
I'd
for
be
young Earth
I'd be
creation.
interested in seeing does he have a publication on that, a book or a website or something?
So he has a website called Peaceful Science. I'll send you a private chat the link to his blog post where he does this.
Okay.
He uses a genetics simulator called Argweaver, or ancestral recombination graph, is what they make, and so it's a relatively advanced way to see coalescent time, and obviously there hasn't been any creationist response at all.
Answers in Genesis doesn't want to tackle that one, huh?
No, they don't. They like feigning science. They don't actually like doing science.
Yeah.
Even, have you ever heard of like Nathaniel Jeanson from Answers in Genesis, I think? Yeah, him and Rob Carter, they pretend to do work. They don't really do much. They hand wave a lot, and they say, if we use these absurd assumptions, then we can get the conclusion that we want, because the conclusion is obviously baked into whatever they're trying to write up.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a response to the most recent Answers news.
Oh, really?
And part of the reason that I picked that one is they started talking about the new Texas abortion law. Law is my forte. And they have this middle school science teacher talking about how the legal system works. And he gets about as much right about the legal system as I would trying to teach college biology.
Yeah, that's another thing that's really funny about Answers in Genesis. They, specifically on the Answers news, but pretty much everywhere, they might have a person who's supposedly an expert in a given field. They always have that person talking outside of their field. If there's ever a genetics thing that comes up, it's Bodie Hodge. If there's ever a paleontology thing that comes up, it's Georgia Purdom. It's
interesting.
So strange.
I had not noticed that. I did notice, and I did comment on the fact that Georgia was commenting on medical issues in that episode, and that's not her field. Her field is genetics. But I just kind of assumed that it's because, well, they don't have a lawyer on their panel. They did have a doctor, but Dr. Menen, I can't remember exactly what his name was. It started with an M. He recently retired. He's no longer on the staff, so they don't have their doctor anymore. I did not notice
Menton,
that they had Menton, that they did that on purpose.
I don't know if it's. I mean, I have a hard time assigning like intentionality to it. I don't want to directly accuse them of lying or being dishonest unless I have direct evidence of them being, lying or being dishonest. Which, I mean, yeah, there's plenty of that.
Sometimes there is.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
There's plenty of that. But I mean, on a case that's unrelated to that, I don't want to just instantly blame dishonesty. But yeah, if you watch enough AIG stuff, they almost never have people talking about what they actually do. I don't know if it's intentional. I don't know if it's, the scientists know that it would be like, they know it'd be a misrepresentation, and they just don't want to like say anything about it. I don't really know.
Okay. Jenny Morgan says they need a lawyer, hire Granny. They can't.
That would be the most fun panel though.
Yeah, it would, but I can't work there because I can't sign the statement of faith.
That is fair.
And that was one of the things that I found the most hilarious about this particular episode of Answers News, is they were complaining that people were only saying what they had to say in order to put forth a particular agenda. And I said, you literally signed a statement saying that you won't say anything that doesn't promote this agenda, and you're complaining about somebody else doing that.
Yeah, I find that a lot of times to be very hypocritical. But yeah, I don't know. I that's why I usually stick to their terrible science instead of their hot political takes.
Yeah.
because I feel like politics and medicine and all that kind of stuff just makes me angry. I don't like being angry.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Jenny Morgan says, I have faith in you. I'll sign it. But we have a really good question from Brainbug. Brainbug asks, Walker, what is your favorite hominid?
So it's a tough question. Like outside of modern humans, I would probably have to say Denisovans. But that's also not even like a real answer because we don't know anything about Denisovans. So I don't know. I think I really find the story of Denisovans interesting because there's so much mystery around it. And so I just think they're the coolest. But I think as far as like which ones do I like, yeah, I'll leave it at Denisovans. I don't know what else I would say.
I'm looking for a YouTube link, and if I can find it, I'll download it and pull it up. But it was, I can't remember who originally made it, but there's two people talking, or else it's a man talking to an ape, and he's saying that, you know, we know the human evolution didn't happen because we don't have the missing link. And he says, actually, we do have the missing link. We have Homo. I can't remember the order that they pull them up, but there's Homo habilis, and there's Homo erectus, and
it's from Futurama.
Okay.
And it's the Dr. Orangutan, and the doctor was like, "We are not related to humans. We're good old apes." It's kind of obviously it's a joke because it's the opposite for a lot of creationists and stuff. But yeah, he goes down the entire line. The human scientists like, actually, we do. We have Homo erectus. Aha! But you don't have a link between Homo erectus and orangutans. Well, actually, we do. It's Homo habilis. And he just goes all the way through like a massive list. It's a funny video.
That is the video that broke young Earth creationism for my son.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Was your son also like young Earth creation? What did he leave young Earth creationism before you did? Or did you leave first?
He was the one that convinced, well, let's see. I was kind of on the fence for a while because I'd read enough from different believers that said evolution is fake, and other believers saying no, it's not. Who my pastor was at the moment had a lot to do with it. And when I was in one church, they were very much young Earth, or I shouldn't say very much, but they kind of leaned young Earth, but they didn't talk about it a whole lot. And then when I went to another church, they were very much not young Earth. In fact, our pastor really didn't like Ken Ham, because Ken Ham said, if you are not a young Earth creationist, you are not a Christian. And he named, about 5 people who are considered some of the best Christian thinkers of our day that are not young Earth creationists. And so he found Ken Ham to be completely disingenuous. And that's really what broke young Earth creationism for me, was that opinion. Now, my kids were going to Christian schools. And in the Christian schools, they were telling them that young Earth was in fact true. One of the other things that kind of broke it for me was actually a Ken Ham video, because one of my older two, I have a split. I had 2 kids, then there was a 12-year gap, and then I had another kid. And no, that was not an accident. The youngest one was very much planned. And by the way, was the best decision I have ever made in my life. I am closer to that youngest one that I had when I was 40 years old than I am to the other 2 that are in their 30s. But part of that is they've got their own lives, and the youngest one I can still talk to a lot. But anyway, so one of the older 2 was sick, and missed a video and brought it home from school, so we watched it together, and it was a Ken Ham video, and in it was, they were saying, were you there? If your history teacher tells you that this rock is more than 6,000 years old, you should ask your history teacher, were you there? And I thought, even believing this stuff, that isn't the way to teach kids how to behave in school. I mean, that is rude and disrespectful. And why are you telling kids to be rude and disrespectful to their teachers, even if you do disagree with them? You could just as easily say the same thing to the Bible teacher. If the Bible teacher tells you that Noah built a boat, were you there? Did you see that?
Yeah, and the whole Ark story is not even a first-hand account, according to it would have been written by Moses, who lived thousands of years after the flood, according to Young Earth timeline.
Yeah.
So
I was kind of on the fence. I didn't believe in young Earth creationism, but I really didn't have anything to replace it at that point. So I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought. But my son, when he was in junior high or high school, saw that Futurama video, and I was like, oh, this evolution thing, it's for real. Everything they're teaching me here in science class, this is a bunch of garbage. And that really was the beginning of the end of Christianity for my son. And then what happened was my son came to me and said, Mom, the flood never happened. And I said, why do you say that? And he said, well, for starters, the methane gas would have killed all the animals in the ark. And I really? And so I, of course, being the adult, no, you're wrong. But after he left the room, and when I was alone, I went and looked it up on the internet, and I found about 4 different sites that all confirmed what he said. And I was like, oh, this really didn't happen. And, it wasn't just the methane gas. I was finding all these websites that were telling me that the ark never happened. And they were giving me lots of different reasons why we know the flood didn't happen. The geology is a little over my head. I have a hard time with geology. I just don't know enough about geology.
I'm right there with you.
But, the history is the one that was really the straw that broke the camel's back for me, because the history I understood perfectly. And I also realized at that point, I've always known this. I just didn't realize that I knew this, because I know that there were people in China at the time that the flood is supposed to have happened. And I know that the civilizations that, in China did not cease to exist, and then a couple hundred years later start over again. And that's part of the reason why I was asking you some of the questions about migration, is because the whole idea of human migration occurring after the Tower of Babel, I could see a young Earth creationist saying, well, these aren't pre-humans, these are humans that are migrating after Tower of Babel. I'm not saying that they do say that, but I could see them doing that.
No, that's exactly what they say. Yeah, they think all of modern human civilizations are post-Babel, and there probably were people that didn't live in the Middle East during Babel, but it would have been those were the Neanderthals and the Denisovans and the other stuff like that. Obviously that's not true. That's interesting though. I don't know. I also sort of had a bit of double think going on, I guess, whenever I was leaving creation-ish, because I've always loved, biology and, biodiversity and all that kind of stuff. I've just always thought it was really cool. Even when I was little, I would watch documentaries and stuff about the Ice Age. And so I had, on one hand, this belief in all of the species lived at the same time and they were all aboard the boat and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, I have the belief of the Ice Age, and, you have periods with different faunal groups and stuff like that. And eventually, whenever I was old enough to realize, like, oh, this is, these ideas are contradictory, I sort of became like a OEC, progressive creationist type thing.
Mm-hmm. And in response to Brainbug's comment, yes, I was well aware that Matt Powell has a passion for methane gas because he thinks that dinosaurs farted themselves out of existence.
Yeah, I hear he also likes blowing it out of his ears, right? No, I saw your takedown of Matt Powell's genetic entropy video. I thought that was great.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Matt Powell is... his ignorance to confidence ratio is outstanding. It's hard to believe anybody that uninformed and intentionally uninformed specifically can also be that confident about anything they say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Jenny Morgan says humans in the Americas is 15,000 years old. Yes, I intend to talk about that next week. Next week I have Otangelo on, and Otangelo is going to argue about why the arc really happened, and I'm going to argue why it did not from a historical and archaeological perspective. And one of those perspectives is because of the DNA of humans in the Americas that we can trace the lineage of back 15,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Otangelo, I think he's a nice guy, but try to avoid any talk of biochem.
Yeah.
Then he'll just run in circles with that.
I did tell him that I want to stay away from science and stay in archaeology and history, although I do have to admit that I do plan to bring up one point myself that is genetics, which is more science. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the coalescence problem, so like the time to most recent, allele for any given site on the genome, that's a way bigger problem than a lot of creationists would like to believe. And I've yet to see any of them actually reconcile it in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A lot of them either like hand wave it or they make up things about like recombination rates, which recombination rates don't even affect mutation rates. So it's not like that actually helps. You're just saying something that sounds smart so that you can pretend to your creationist audience that you actually have a response.
What is that?
Recombination?
Mm-hmm.
So recombination is, how we have two chromosomes we have a diploid genome, right? So we have two copies of our genome. One comes from our mother and one comes from our father, right? Mm-hmm. So whenever the reason that we have diploid chromosomes is because whenever we are, producing our own gametes, the chromosomes do this thing called crossing over, where like, how they look like little X's. Mm-hmm. At least when they're replicating, the ends of the X's or like the legs of the X's will cross over with other chromosomes and they'll swap genetic information back and forth. Right. So you might have inherited one allele from your mom and one allele from your dad that are on the same chromosome. But a way to improve genetic diversity would be if you could get those two alleles onto the same chromosome, or else, you would probably have some sort of deleterious buildup. So, you can inherit those two alleles from different parents and still end up passing them both on to your offspring, or vice versa. You could inherit both alleles and then pass on neither to your offspring, right? So that's what recombination is. And they'll say like, oh, well, if there's more crossing over events, then that would explain, coalescent times, which it doesn't. Obviously, you can imagine that, right? Like having more crossing over events doesn't actually change how many alleles are created or how fast mutations are happening. It just means that you mix up your genetic information faster.
Okay. We have a question from Purple Rhymes with Orange who says, do you think the arrival of humans was a significant factor in the extinction of megafauna in North America?
Personally, yeah, I do. I think the climactic change of like the Ice Age ending as well as humans coming into North America was kind of like a 1-2 punch almost for a lot of megafaunal species. And the biggest reason I would say that, because, a lot of people as a counterpoint would say like, oh, well, humans coexisted with these, megafaunal species for, a couple thousand years, right? That's true, but also just, thinking about it, all of the biggest species alive today come from Africa, where our species evolved. There's not any big species left really from outside of Africa, where our species is more or less invasive to. So it kind of makes sense in my opinion. But of course, it could change.
When you're talking about megafauna, you're talking about huge plants?
So megafauna refers to the technical definition of megafauna refers to any species that is over 1,000 or 100 kilograms, right? So we're talking about bears, horses, elephants, obviously, hippos, rhinos. So pretty much really big animals. And just from listing that, obviously, it's a lot easier to come up with examples that are from Africa than outside of Africa.
That was one thing that I learned on a recent trip. I have a cousin that lives in the Lincoln, Nebraska area, and we went up and visited, and we went to the museum at the University of Nebraska, and we saw all the elephant fossils and the giant beavers and the giant, there were a lot of giant versions of current animals that were really fascinating. But I had no idea that there used to be elephants in North America.
Yeah, there were some crazy. So that's my other favorite topic to talk about, diversity of extinct proboscideans. But I don't have to go too off the deep end with that. But yeah, there were some really crazy animals that lived. I mean, the megafaunal density across all continents was something like 100 times higher. You had mammoths that were living in North America, like multiple species of mammoths. You had woolly mammoths, you had Columbian mammoths. You also had ambelodonts, which are a different species of or a different family of proboscideans that are gomphotheres, quote unquote. And then you had actual true gomphotheres, and then you had mastodons. There's so much proboscidean diversity that lived in North America alone, and we don't have any of that left.
Purple says that humans are the reasons why we no longer have mastodons. Did they hunt them to extinction?
Well, humans definitely hunted mastodons. There's a state park in Missouri called Mastodon State Park where they've actually found evidence of humans killing and eating mastodons. I don't know if, once again, it's hard to assign causality, right? I don't know if we could say for sure humans killed off mastodons, but I'm sure, if you have a predator population eating the species that's already on the brink of extinction, it doesn't help,
And Jenny Morgan asks, why did humans never migrate to Republicans?
As an Alabamian, I can tell you that's false.
Which reminds me, does anyone know how the recall vote in California is going? Do we have any statistics from it yet? Have the polls closed? I don't know yet.
I was not aware that there was a recall vote in California. What is it for?
Oh, yeah. Okay. There's been a call for a recall of the governor of California, and this is really important to national politics because if he gets recalled, he's going to be replaced with a Republican, and sorry about that. I was trying to pull up a website that would let me know if they've got anything in yet. The polls might not be closed yet. It's 8:00 here where I live in Central Time Zone. It's only 6 p.m. in California, so the polls may not be closed yet. But yeah, this is going to be really important. California has been doing really great with COVID, and if Elder, the guy that's running against Newsom, ends up the new governor, I foresee COVID just taking off in California. Jenny Morgan says the polls are still open.
1/3 voted by mail.
Yep.
Was that the original problem? Was it a bunch of people complaining about mail-in ballots or something?
No, it was people complaining about COVID restrictions. A lot of people didn't like the COVID restrictions of the mask mandates and so forth, and so they called for a recall of the governor.
It's so dumb. Wait. So they didn't like the mask mandates that the governor was imposing, or they didn't like the
Yes.
mask mandates? Oh,
Yeah.
can you even do that after they won already?
Oh yeah, yeah. If it's in your constitution, you can recall a governor. Yeah,
Huh.
it's a provision that allows you that if you elect somebody, you're not stuck with them if they turn out to be a complete fraud or whatever. You just have a vote to recall them, and that's what this is. It's a recall vote, but you have to have a petition with a certain number of signatures. That you have to have signatures from a certain percentage of the population to do this, and you have to have like, I don't know, 20% of the population to sign a petition in order to initiate this process.
And I'm guessing that's like a state by state rule. That's not.
It's a state by state rule. It depends on what's in your state constitution. Yep.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Yeah, I've never heard of that. I've heard of like special elections and stuff. I didn't know recalls. Right there.
Yep.
Interesting.
Recalls are rather rare. I have not seen very many of them in my lifetime.
Interesting. Yeah, sorry, I'm reading about it. Okay.
Okay, getting back to humans. I'm going to bring up one of my favorite talking points for with young Earth creationists, and I originally got this from a video that Erica Gutsick-Gibbon did, and I pulled up this chart that she had, and I've used it for a number of things. Here it is.
I think I know what chart you're referring to. It's very funny. Yeah, that one's very funny.
I love that chart. That they've got all these skulls here, and they've asked a group of creationists to identify which of these skulls are ape and which of these skulls are human. And the creationists cannot determine, or at least not consistently, which are which.
No, it seems like creationists are slowly getting more and more inclusive on what is and what isn't a human. Just because, well, actually, this chart's showing the exact opposite. But I don't know. Because we're finding more fossils, so it's making the gradation from basal to derived like a lot harder to deny. A lot of them arbitrarily just say the genus Homo were descended from Adam and Eve, whereas like the genus Australopithecus, they were fully ape, whatever that means. But no, that's arbitrary. Because I think the main cutoff between Australopithecus and genus Homo is the cranial capacity. I think if you're over 500 cc's, which is a unit of volume, then you're in the genus Homo. If you're under 500 cc's, then you're an Australopithecine. But obviously, that's that's a sliding scale from anywhere from like 0 to 2,000, 3,000, right? Well, the biggest humans are like 15 to 1,800, right? So 0 to 2,000, it's a sliding scale. It's not like a hard and fast divide. That's a fun one though. My favorite was a lot of creationists were complaining. I think it came up in contested bones. Are you familiar with the Australopithecus Sediba find?
No.
So Australopithecus Sediba was it was found relatively recently, like within the past 5 years or so. And people didn't really know how to how to identify it because it had some kind of derived features. It was relatively tall. It had pretty good. It had like proportional arm and leg lengths, like what we would have. It had a similar like hip structure, but I think its skull was basal, right? So it would have had a more Australopithecine like skull. It would have had like curved fingers, like Australopithecines, whereas we have straight fingers for dexterity. So they were literally saying that Australopithecus Sediba was just an Australopithecus specimen, probably like A. africanus or something like that, and a Homo habilis that ran into each other really fast, and their bones just happened to line up in a way that was, in articulation for some reason.
They had a car accident.
Yeah, exactly. They were just biking too fast, and it's kind of ridiculous. That's what I'm saying. Like, the creationists don't actually propose any actually have real solutions. They have hand wavy solutions that sound, informed if you aren't familiar with it. Like, once again, how do two hands, or how does an arm collide with another arm and just knock off the hand to where it looks like one hand came, or like the hand came from one person and then the arm came from another person, and the backbone came from the monkey, but the head came from a person. You know what I mean? Or like the jaw came from a human, but the actual skull, like the cranium, came from a monkey. Like, come on, that's not realistic at all.
And then the next question would be, were they found in the same strata? Were they found in the same region?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So Australopithecus Sediba was extremely well preserved, and it was found in articulation. Like if someone dug up a grave and found all of the bones that belong to that person, head at the top, feet at the bottom.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying when I say they were found in articulation. Like, the bones were in the correct locations where they should be for an anatomical, they were in the anatomically correct positions, and they're suggesting that these two individuals, I guess, just ran really fast into each other.
And Brainbug says, don't forget to subscribe to Just a Walking Fish. And yes, definitely. I've watched some of his content, and it is excellent. It is informative. And especially if you are like me, where, you don't work in a science field, it can be really interesting. So yes, please do subscribe to Walker.
I definitely try to make it intelligible. Yeah, so I'm glad to hear that y'all find what I say interesting. I think I owe my subscribers a slap, though, because at the end of my last video I said, if I don't post something in a while, please slap me. So I still haven't posted since May.
Okay.
Good stuff.
I just kind of go by when I get a notice. There's a couple people that I watch, every time they've got something out, but for the most part, I just go to my homepage and there's something from Walker. I'll take a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't post something in a while, I won't necessarily notice.
Yeah. I understand that. I don't know if I really get recommended on the homepage. The only time that I've ever, I guess, caught the algorithm wave was I made a video. It was a weird video. It was about the debate between Simon Conway Morris and Stephen Jay Gould. It doesn't have any direct implications to creation versus evolution. It doesn't have, it wasn't, it was just talking about essentially philosophy of evolution almost. And it was very funny because that's the one that got picked up by the algorithm, because I mentioned the word carcinization once, and it became a meme a month after I made the video. And so it got 3,000 or 4,000 views.
Okay.
And it wasn't intentional, but I just happened to mention this word that eventually became a meme.
That's cool. And what does it mean?
So carcinization it's actually really interesting. It's the scientific name for the tendency for non-crab-like things to evolve into crabs, basically.
Oh, I assumed it had something to do with cancer.
It sort of does. So the constellation Cancer is a giant crab. It's
a crab, yeah.
Yeah, because either the Greeks or the Romans, Cancer meant crab in that language. I'm not a linguist. I don't really remember. So that's where the word comes from. Carcinization and cancer and crab, they all have similar root words. Yeah, Yeah, so the crab body plan, the squat dude with pinchers on the front and 10 legs because they're decapods, um, that has actually evolved like 5 or 6 times independently, which is kind of
Mm.
funny. A lot of times it comes from things that look a lot like lobsters, and eventually they
Hmm.
just become crabs. um, and it's common enough, at least, that it has a fancy scientific name.
Hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. One thing I'm wondering about is one of the things that I have found the most convincing with regards to breaking young Earth
Oh crap!
creationists is retroviruses.
Hmm. I'm sorry, I
Um,
missed the entire question because my internet cut out.
okay, okay. It wasn't exactly a question. It was more of a comment that I was wanting you to comment on, and that was that one of the things that I found the most convincing in the evolutionary field is retroviruses.
hmm Yeah, I think the argument from like endogenous retroviruses and pseudogenes and stuff like that, they're very interesting arguments. Um, a lot of ERVs are like ERV families. So, there's like weird, biological processes that happen like once it becomes in the cell, but it still has like reverse transcriptase and stuff. It might put itself elsewhere. But
Mm,
I think just like
yep.
at the very least, the initial insertions,
Hmm.
I think that's a pretty solid argument because there's 3 billion bases in the genome, and it could insert not everywhere, but in a
Hmm.
lot of different sites. And the odds of these different taxa having the exact same insertion site, despite those sites not necessarily having some sort of functional purpose, it's
Hmm.
really interesting. And like I said, I think the argument with like pseudogenes is pretty similar if you're familiar with that one.
Hmm. Hmm. I know that you said that you grew up in Alabama.
hmm
So one question I have to ask is, have you ever visited Dino Adventureland?
So, um, I've wanted to multiple times. I
Really?
was going to. I was trying to gonna. I was trying to visit last summer, but then a hurricane hit like the weekend I was going to visit, and also in the middle of COVID. He's not going to take it seriously, and so I was like, it's just not worth it. And then this summer I was planning to, and then I just got very busy. Never had the opportunity to, and then also like I think near the end of the summer, he started having some legal problems.
Hmm.
Um, so I still haven't gone. I definitely want to, especially if he remains out of jail, although he probably should be in jail. So I'm happy either way. Um, yeah, it's only like 2 hours from where I grew up. So I'd definitely
Hmm.
love to.
Hmm. And it's not that far from where I live too. So if you ever want a little company, I can come
Mhm.
along and I'll bring my son too.
I think it'd be fun if we tried to get like a group to go to the Dinosaur Adventure Land.
I have a friend in Australia to join on that trip as well, but I have a feeling that that may not happen.
Uh huh. Yeah, that's fair. It's I don't know what to expect from Dinosaur Adventureland since most of the videos of people going there have just been like Kent riding around on his four-wheeler. So I don't know what the rest of the place is like.
From what I've seen, it doesn't look like there's much there.
hmm
Because one of the biggest things he does in his video is ask for people to volunteer to come down and build stuff on the property.
hmm
And he's trying to get people to build some tree forts and stuff like that.
Yeah, it seems like a weird, almost like a 90s summer camp style thing where
Hmm.
it's like you have like this one log cabin and that's the whole, museum part of it. And then there's some, like there's like a little playground in front, I think, with like some sciencey stuff, I guess. I
Hmm.
don't know. It's a very very strange place. I definitely want to go at some point. Have a I don't know if I want to go and say, oh yeah, I'm studying evolution, or if I want to go and be like, I'm a chem major at Auburn, and I just never got convinced by the whole evolution thing. Or maybe I could say
Hmm.
like I'm on the fence or something. I don't know. I don't know how
Mhm.
I'd play it, because on one hand, I think it might be fun to
Mhm.
be open about evolution there, but also that place is a cold compound and it kind of
Oh,
scares
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So,
I
eh.
wouldn't go alone.
Yeah, no, I would definitely not go alone, and I would let multiple people know where I am in case I go MIA.
I wouldn't worry about that as much as I'd worry about just I don't know, just being kind of overwhelmed, is all. One of the things that Kent Hovind says all the time that I've just absolutely scratched my head over, because even a young Earth creationist usually isn't this dense, as he
Hmm.
says there is no fossil record.
Hmm.
I've seen him say that repeatedly in some of his whack and atheist videos, where he says, this person talks about the fossil record. Hello, there is no fossil record. What do you
So,
mean there's no fossil record?
yeah, I don't. I've never understood what he meant by that. I mean, he's right in that fossils are like snapshots in time. There's not a fossil that's a transition, because the fossils are one individual from a population that lived at the time. But I think there's enough fossils at this point that you can fill in most of the gaps, especially with important clades to this whole thing. Like, you know, I don't think creationists would ever. I think if a young Earth creationist ever said that humans and chimps were related, they'd accept the rest of it as well. I think if you
Mm,
can convince them that Hominini shares an ancestor, I don't think
mhm,
they care about the rest.
mhm,
And like the hominin fossil record is just so well understood, and all of the holes in the hominin fossil record are from like the late Miocene, so we're talking 4-ish million years ago.
mhm,
And at that time, like no one's saying that more derived Australopithecines and stuff like Homo africana, or not Homo, Australopithecus africanus, Afarensis, Sediba, stuff like that. Nobody's saying that they're humans. Almost all of the creationists are saying that they're apes. So, we have enough of a gradation between the ape to human thing that I just don't get it.
Well, actually, just from having been a believer for 42 years, I know that that is actually the last area that they're going to give up. If you
Humans?
could, yeah,
Oh, for
if
sure.
if you could work on them to understand that there is no place where you can put a dividing line in evolution, because young Earth creationists accept speciation. They just think that there's some kind of dividing line that cannot be crossed, which they call the kind, that you can't cross from one kind to another kind. And they can't define what exactly a kind is, because if they could, then you could show them, okay, this definitely speciated here, and you've got this one on this side of your kind line and this one on this side of your kind line, and we can see the direct lineation there.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that they would hang on to for dear life would be humans, because the entire narrative depends on humans being a unique creation, and
Mm-hmm.
that humans are the only creature that has a soul, and they're the only creatures that are made in the image of God. And so if humans evolved from other animals, you lose all of that.
Yeah, there's so first of all, that's what kind of that was my final straw as well. Like that's the human being special creation was like the very last thing I held on to. I'd gotten to a point where I accepted that all other life shared common ancestry, but humans were special. Um, and then I went through a couple of things. Like I had a conversation with a Dino denier, and I was like, "This is ridiculous. Are my beliefs just as ridiculous as someone else?" Um, and then I also started learning about the hominin fossil record and extinct human species. Um, but there's some really interesting beliefs, especially in like the old Earth crowd,
Hmm.
about how like Imago Dei, the and made in his image thing is meant, right? Because theistic evolutionists, when they say Imago Dei, they are meaning like we're made in his image in the way that like we have morals and we have ethics and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, young Earth creationists think that it means like literally like we're made in his image. Like if you were able to look at God, he would look like us. And then old Earth creationists, they're the ones that sort of hang on to that soul idea the most. And so you have some people saying that like humans share common ancestry with Neanderthals, but Neanderthals didn't have Imago Dei. So Neanderthals didn't have souls, and souls were a thing that came later after our most recent common ancestor with some other hominids. But those other hominids also don't share like ancestry with apes, and it's just a really convoluted system.
Mm-hmm. I saw Paula Gia had a guest on recently that talked about an idea where humans did evolve from apes, but that the Garden of Eden was special, and that this was a small area where God created a special creation on Earth that was kind of separated from the rest of the Earth, and that's where the special people came from. Although when Paul asked him a couple of questions about how after they left the garden, how did they interact with the other species, and he really didn't have any answers for that. But it's an interesting theory.
That sounds like Dr. Swamidass, the guy I talked about earlier, but I don't know if that's the one you're referring to.
It could very well be.
Yeah, like Fazil Rana has similar-ish beliefs. He was the one that I was referring to specifically when it's like humans share ancestry with Neanderthals, but Adam and Eve came after those ancestors, and Adam and Eve were the first ones with souls, and all of their kids have souls. And it was sort of, I guess, like a pseudo-genetic thing where you like pass down a soul to your kids. I don't know. It's once again, I do appreciate young Earth creationism and how like cut and dry it is. You know, it's very it's a very like black or white worldview, which on one hand makes it more wrong because almost nothing in the world is black or white. You know, there's obviously a lot of nuance. But on the other hand, it makes it a lot easier to argue against because, you know, their beliefs are a lot more laid out.
People like Matt Powell are the ones that bother me the most. And Ken Ham is going to retire somewhat soon. I mean, he's getting up there in years. And I really think that the whole organization of Answers in Genesis is going to kind of fall apart without him, because I don't think there's anyone that has the leadership to really hold it together the way he has. And I think the same thing is going to happen with some of the other older leaders. Particularly what we see going on in John Piper's church. John Piper was considered one of the best Calvinist theologians of our day, and after he retired from pastoring, his church has gone through so many changes in leadership in the last 5 years that it's just kind of falling apart. It's just crumbling without the leadership. But Matt Powell is very young. He's only about 24. And he is kind of being taken under Kent Hovind's wing and is taking over Hovind's shoes. And that's what bugs me. Is I was hoping that Hovind would just kind of fade into the dirt as he gets old and is gone, but it looks like Powell is going to kind of take over the whole thing for him.
Yeah, but I also wonder, like, I really wonder how many people take Matt Powell seriously. Like, people barely even take Kent Hovind seriously at this point.
That's a really good point.
Like, I mean, when you have people like Answers in Genesis have like been disowning Kent Hovind since the early 2000s. And I think Matt Powell says enough stuff that's just so blatantly like dishonest and obviously wrong, like the whole dinosaurs farting themselves to extinction. I don't think if you're like just saying things that, you got to be a little bit more, like sly with your lies and stuff. I don't think you can be that blatantly lying and, pull a fast one on someone.
Or that humans evolved from African Americans.
Yeah, he says humans evolved from African Americans. They farted themselves to extinction. He thinks that monkeys like got on little boats and sailed to North America. And like He
Well,
has one
actually,
of the worst presentations of genetic entropy that I've ever heard. Like he just has very poor presentation. Oh, and also doesn't he say that like we think squid came from space or something?
I don't know. I've not heard that one. I
Mm-hmm.
have heard them say that we think that something, that maybe life came from space, but I have not heard specifically that squid came from space.
He was citing some weird, like, it was never published as a study. There was some weird, like, probably daily news article that said, squid have DNA that's wholly unlike anything else on Earth, so cephalopods may have their origins in space. That's obviously not true. No one believes that. That's his biggest flaw, in my opinion. He builds like these ridiculous strawmans. Like I don't like calling, I don't like pointing to creationists being like, oh, you're straw manning me. I mean, a lot of times they are misrepresenting you, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not doing it intentionally. But I think
Mm-hmm.
Matt Powell has to be doing it intentionally.
Mm.
But he built up these crazy strawmans. You call him out for it, and then he'll be like, "Oh, debate me," and you're like, "Okay," and then he just goes silent.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he threw down, he put out a video where he claimed that he was throwing down the ultimate challenge to atheists. And yeah, that I think that's the one that you saw of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent him a copy of that, and I haven't heard from him. But one of the things that was really dishonest that he did in that video is he included some copyrighted music so that you couldn't respond without getting a copyright claim.
Mm.
But I'm actually pretty good at writing fair use denials,
Mm-hmm.
and I I've had two of my fair use claims outright granted by the person who held the copyright. Now, granted, one of those was dark matter. I used
Mm-hmm.
a dark matter clip, and as soon as he saw that I had used it and I asked for a fair use, he granted me permission to use it. But most of them get ignored because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of these are owned by huge labels. These things get used all the time. They get hundreds, and people as small as me, I'm too insignificant for them to review my video to see what I'm doing. And so what ends up happening is that copyright claim, I've got a dispute. It takes 30 days to resolve the dispute. And if they don't answer in 30 days, I win. And that's
Mm-hmm.
usually what happens. I win by default.
No, that's pretty good. Yeah, I had one video that had a copyright claim on it because I used a clip of Moscow by the Europop band Genghis Khan. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know. I mean, my channel's not even monetized anyway, so I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
You can
Mm-hmm.
have that video. I mean, I also don't really particularly care about monetizing my videos. I mostly make them for informative reasons. Like I like teaching people.
And Mo says, I think there's clear evidence that Matt Powell is not only dishonest, but even emotionally disturbed. It's very likely due to his isolation and indoctrination. The other thing about Matt Powell is his closeness to some of the NIFB pastors, and they have some really
Yeah.
dangerous ideas.
Wasn't he originally from like Steven Anderson's church?
I don't know. I know that he is definitely friends with Steven Anderson. I know he's done some stuff with Steven Anderson, but whether he's from his church or not, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he used to, before he got super into like the creationism stuff. I remember, a couple years ago, he was like really into like just the idea of killing gay people. If you remember that, he had like
I do
a
not.
conversation with Skylar Fiction. Yeah, that was originally how people learned about him, like how he rose to,
Is
prominence, I
popularity.
guess.
I'm
Yeah, he was
actually
advocating like active death penalty for homosexuality.
I'm actually fairly new to the community myself. I have only been an atheist for 2 years.
Mm.
So I'm pretty much only up to date on what's been going on for the last 2 years. And yes, Jenny Morgan brings up a point. Yay! Greg Locke was banned permanently from Twitter. Happy day, happy day.
Yeah,
Do you know who that is?
me?
Yeah.
You were telling me about it before we went live.
Yeah, he was an anti-masker.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if y'all saw as well, but the whole Bob Inyart thing. He was not a very good person. he used to play back in like on his radio show back in the 80s and 90s. He would play Another One Bites the Dust while reading obituaries from people who died of
Yes.
HIV. Yeah.
Yes. 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 Yeah.
And, you know, obviously anti-mask, anti-vaccine, all that other anti pretty much everything. Died of COVID. I don't know. Win stupid the play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I mean, it's to the point
Darwin
where
Award.
the big creationist organizations are promoting the vaccine. Like, you know something's up when I agree with, you know, Rob Carter or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are out of time, and so we need to go ahead and wrap it up. And so I am going to give Walker a chance to tell us what he has coming up on his channel, and then we'll close out. Or if you have any other closing thoughts, you know, please go ahead. Feel free to share those as well.
No, so my channel's sort of taken a backseat this little last while for, you know, real world job and research and stuff like that, classes. I hope to get some more content out. The problem is I have like so many ideas, and then I'll either like make a script for something and even potentially start on editing, and then it just doesn't turn out how I want it to, or you know, a lot of times I just don't even have time to pursue it in the first place. But, you know, I would love, you know, I definitely plan to keep doing stuff for my channel. It's just I don't have any promises as to when.
Okay, very good, very good. And coming up on my channel later this week, I will be releasing a video that is a response to Answers News. There's two major things. They had so much in that you know, they normally do like 4 or 5 different stories, and I picked 2 out of them. One is on transgender treatment for children, and the other is on the Texas abortion law. 2 things that I'm both very passionate about. So that's what's coming up on my produced videos. And then next week, I will go back to Wednesday again, and Otangela will be on, and we will be talking about whether or not there is evidence for Noah's Ark.
That'll be fun.
Or actually, not so much Noah's Ark. I take it back. It's really, the question is there evidence for a global flood? Which really are 2 very different questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, with that, thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate your presence. And Walker, thank you for being such a great teacher for us and helping some of us old farts to catch up on what's new in science.
Of course, yeah. I like I said, I absolutely love teaching people. I mean, I'll ramble about whatever you want as far as genetics and human evolution goes. You know, I love population genetics as well and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think all this stuff is super cool.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Live your life.